A plainly dressed man walks into a restaurant with a homeless person. They just want to have a simple dinner, but then they are insulted, ridiculed, just because of their appearance. But the person being insulted is the chairman of a trillion-dollar corporation. And what happens next makes the whole restaurant go silent. Do you think you know someone by what they're wearing? Listen to the end. Because the truth is, always wear the plainest shirt. The wind blew gently through the trees on the sidewalk. The late afternoon sunlight was as soft as honey, spreading across the city's old pavement bricks, among the bustling crowd. A middle-aged man walked quietly. He was not wearing a suit, nor a luxurious watch, just a slightly wrinkled white shirt, covered by an old ash-gray khaki jacket. His simple dress pants were rolled up slightly at the hem, revealing a pair of dusty, frayed sneakers. Looking at him, no one would have thought that he was James Miller, chairman of the globally famous Our Victory Group. James had a fixed routine every Friday afternoon. When the work of the week had temporarily ended, he would leave the office without letting his assistant go with him. All alone, no driver, no luxury car, no escort. He walked like an ordinary citizen, wandering through the small streets in the heart of the city. For him, it was not only a way to breathe real air, but also a way to see real people. He stopped by a small stall, bent down to pick up a wallet someone had just dropped. He ran after it and gently called out, "Excuse me, you dropped this wallet." The young woman turned around, her eyes filled with surprise and gratitude. James just smiled slightly, then continued walking, leaving behind a thank you that he had not yet said. A moment later, he met a boy standing in the corner crying, holding a torn backpack. James walked over, sat down next to him, and asked softly, "Why don't you go home?" The boy sobbed, saying that his friends teased him because he didn't have money to buy a new notebook. He nodded, then rummaged through his pocket for a few bills and gave them to him, but not with words of pity, but with a sympathetic look and a decisive voice. "Go to the nearest bookstore. Choose the notebook you like best, because you deserve to have beautiful pages to write your dreams." The boy said nothing, just bowed his head in thanks. James put his hand on the boy's shoulder, gently patted him, then continued walking. That afternoon, like many other afternoons, he left nothing but small things. But it was those small things that painted a great example of how to be a human being. James did not need anyone to praise him, nor did he need anyone to know who he was. He only needed to know that he was still living according to what he believed in. Kindness does not need to be ostentatious. It just needs to be real. And then, ahead, he stopped. His eyes fell on an image that made his feet stop for a moment. A homeless man was sitting on the side of the road. Next to him was a crumpled plastic bag, and a piece of cardboard with the words scrawled on it, "I'm hungry, just a loaf of bread." And the homeless man was thin. His beard was gray and unkempt. His eyes were sunken from hunger and exhaustion. The coat he wore was frayed at the shoulders. The sleeves were torn. Next to him were a pair of slippers with broken straps and an empty bottle of water. Many people passed by. Some passed by as if they didn't see him. Some frowned and walked away. James stood still for a moment, then walked over. Without hesitation, he sat down next to the man. "Hello, have you eaten yet?" James asked, his voice calm. The homeless man looked up. His eyes were full of doubt, as if he didn't believe that a neatly dressed person would sit and talk to him. I haven't had anything to eat since yesterday. People avoid me when they see me. No one will stay." James smiled lightly, taking out his wallet. Without giving him any money, he just said, I know a pretty good restaurant nearby. If you don't mind, I'd like to invite you to dinner with me." The homeless man's eyes widened. After a while, he said, Are you serious? I stink." James laughed. "People aren't hungry because they stink. It's because there are too few people who understand that they're hungry. Let's go." He stood up and gently helped the man up. A few passers-by stopped to look. There were whispers and disdainful looks, but James didn't care. He led the homeless man to a small restaurant in a quiet alley. It was a traditional faux restaurant, with simple wooden tables and chairs and warm yellow lights. The owner was a middle-aged woman, and when she saw James, she smiled. "It's at this hour again, Uncle. Still faux Thai sinew." James nodded. "Another bowl for my friend. I'm eating with someone else today." The owner glanced at the ragged man standing behind James. She hesitated a bit, then nodded slightly. "Yes, wait a moment." James chose a table in the back corner. He pulled out a chair for the other man, letting him sit first, then sat across from him. The homeless man hesitated, then said softly, "Thank you. I'm Edward. It's been a long time since I've been called a friend." James smiled. "Everyone needs a dinner and someone to sit with. Today, I'm sitting with you." They sat there. One used to be a billionaire. One used to be someone, and then the world forgot his name. But tonight, they were two people sharing a bowl of hot pho in a small restaurant. And what no one expected was that this quiet place would soon echo with sarcastic words, coming from someone who had not learned to look at people with his heart. The sound of the spoon touching the steaming bowl of pho. The steam rose up, fogging the glass and condensing lightly on the old wooden window. In the corner of the restaurant, James and Edward were eating in silence. No words of pity, only the steady sound of slurping pho, and the respectful glances between the two strange men. The peaceful atmosphere did not last long. The door of the restaurant suddenly opened with the jingling, clanging sound of a bell. A young man, wearing a white shirt and an expensive gray vest, walked in. With him was a girl with heavy makeup, holding a sparkling designer bag. He glanced around, then stopped when he saw two men sitting near his table eating. His face grimaced, his eyebrows furrowed. His voice softly burst out with a sarcastic tone. "You see, now the popular restaurant has become a gathering place for the lower class, losing all appetite." The girl giggled, trying to be charming. "Come on, let's choose another table. Anyway, sitting near them is a bit." The young man didn't bother to lower his voice. He continued, deliberately loud enough for the table next to him to hear, "I don't understand how someone dressed like he just crawled out of a gutter dares to come into a restaurant like this. Looking at it makes me want to skip my meal." Edward sat there, stunned. His hands trembled slightly, and the spoon fell to the table with a clatter. His eyes were downcast, not daring to look up. James remained calm, using his chopsticks to pick up a piece of meat, dipping it into the bowl, then eating as if nothing had happened. The young man turned to James, smirking. "As for you, I don't know which area you came from, but eating with that kind of person, you must be in the same class. But the food looks delicious." James didn't respond. He took a sip of water, slowly put the glass down. He didn't show any anger, nor did he avoid it. Just a slight glance at Edward, then a reassuring nod, as if to say, "Don't worry, I'm fine." The atmosphere in the restaurant began to become awkward. The owner walked out from behind, frowning slightly at the customer who caused the trouble, but she didn't dare say anything, just quietly brought the food to his table. The girl accompanying him began to feel embarrassed. She turned to whisper, "Stop it. Everyone has difficult times. Don't make a fuss anymore," but the other man got the better of it. He slammed his hand on the table, his voice louder, "Having difficulties. If you have difficulties, stay at home. Don't go to a public place and make people uncomfortable. This restaurant is really run down." All eyes in the restaurant turned towards them. Some were surprised, some were embarrassed. James remained silent. Edward bowed his head as if to disappear from his seat. However, no one expected what would happen a few minutes later. A person had just entered. A person that the person who was insulting him never thought he would meet in this place. The sound of shoes echoed on the tiled floor. Softly, resolutely. A middle-aged man wearing a smart black suit walked into the shop. His hair was neatly combed. His eyes were sharp. The aura of a leader was evident in every step. As soon as he entered, his eyes scanned the shop, then stopped. Stopped right at the table where James was sitting. The man in the gray suit, the one who had insulted him earlier, was startled. He recognized the person who had just entered. It was Mr. Park, the senior executive director of the Our Victory system, his direct boss. Park walked to James's table, stopped, bowed slightly. His voice full of respect. "President Miller, I didn't expect to see you here. Hello, sir." The whole shop fell silent. The man who had just insulted him was suddenly stunned. The girl beside him turned to him and whispered, "Chairman. Chairman Miller, is that him?" The man's face paled, his mouth gaping. "Impossible. He's the chairman. Is he really James Miller Park?" Turned to look at him, frowning visibly. "Lucas, what are you doing here? Did you just say that in front of your chairman? Did you insult the person sitting at the same table as the chairman?" Lucas swallowed hard, his eyes darting back and forth as if he couldn't find a way out. He stammered, I don't know. I thought he was just some poor person." Park's face turned serious. "You think you have the right to insult others, especially when that person is the one who created jobs for thousands of employees, including you. Apologize right now and prepare yourself to receive the punishment." Lucas bowed deeply, his voice trembling. "Sir James, I am truly sorry. I was too shallow. Please forgive me." James looked at him for a moment, not angry. Not raising his voice, just softly replied, "I do not need an apology for myself. Apologize to him." He pointed to Edward. The homeless man was still confused. Lucas turned around, looking at the man he had just insulted. His legs seemed to buckle. He bowed so deeply that his forehead almost touched the table. "I am sorry. I was wrong." Edward said nothing, just nodded slightly, then continued eating. It was still the same bowl of pho. Still the same normal evening. Only one thing had changed. The silence now carried the echo of a great lesson. The atmosphere in the restaurant seemed to freeze. Everyone present kept silent, as if no one dared to breathe loudly. Lucas still had his head bowed, his hands clenched into fists, and the back of his shirt was soaked with sweat. The girl with him no longer had the same haughty look as before. Her eyes wavered. Her hands grasped the strap of her bag, then released it, then clenched it again, as if not knowing whether to stay or leave. James Miller sat there, in the soft yellow light from the ceiling. Not cold, nor arrogant, just calm as if waiting for the wind to blow through a field. He picked up his glass of water, took a small sip, put it on the table, and then spoke. "Sit down, Edward. Don't let anyone ruin your appetite." Edward raised his head. His eyes were red, but his lips smiled slightly. He picked up his chopsticks again, quietly continuing to eat, as a way to retain the dignity he had just returned. James looked at Park, the CEO standing next to him. "Have you eaten yet? Come eat with me." Park nodded quickly. He pulled out a chair and sat down at the table next to James. The owner, still in shock, hurriedly brought more bowls and chopsticks, mumbling, "Oh my God, the president is eating here." Lucas remained standing still, as if frozen to the tiled floor. James turned around, his eyes calm. "Lucas, which department do you work in?" "Yes, the partnership department, under Mr. Park. I have only been here for 3 months. Do you remember what the core rule that the company values the most?" Lucas trembled. "Is respect for people, of all classes." James nodded. "We don't build an empire for power. We build it because we want to create sustainable value, but nothing lasts if it starts with contempt." He turned to Edward. Uncle Edward was a teacher, taught literature for 27 years. After his wife died, he became depressed, lost his house, lost his way, and was forgotten by society. Lucas's eyes widened. He never thought that the ragged man had been a teacher. James continued, "I once heard him recite poetry, so good that I sat there alone and felt like I was listening to the whole hall applauding." A pause. Lucas bowed his head even more. James did not speak harshly, but each word seemed to touch his self-esteem. "Lucas, if you really want to make things right, then do it. Otherwise, an apology is just a way to reassure yourself." Lucas whispered, "I want to make things right, sir. Please give me a chance." James did not answer immediately. He ate another spoonful of pho, breathing lightly. Then he said softly, "Opportunity is always for those who know how to bow their heads and raise their heads at the right time." That sentence ended the conversation, but opened another chapter, where the once arrogant person had to redefine himself. The meal continued in silence, but it was no longer a heavy silence. It was a gentle silence, enough for each person to reflect on themselves. Lucas quietly pulled his chair to sit at his own table, no longer daring to look straight. The girl with him also quietly put away her phone, putting aside the idea of taking pictures or videos. Edward finished his bowl of pho. For the first time in years, he ate it all without a bitter taste in his mouth. James looked at him and smiled. "Are you free tomorrow? I want to invite you to the office. We need an internal cultural advisor. Perhaps someone who taught literature for more than 20 years would understand how to use words to preserve the dignity of an organization." Edward choked. I don't know what to say. Thank you." James just nodded. "Don't say anything. Come back to life." He stood up and placed his hand on Edward's shoulder. Slowly, then he looked at Lucas. "I don't hate you, Lucas. I hate the way you think you have the right to judge people by their appearance. Remember this, because one day, you might sit at the table next to someone who changes your life and not recognize him because he's not wearing a gold watch." Lucas bowed deeply again. "I will remember it for the rest of my life." James pulled out his wallet. No cash, just left a simple business card. It had only 2 lines: James Miller, friend of the little things. "If you forget you were good, I will remind you." He walked out of the shop. The afternoon wind blew through his shoulders. Behind him, Edward was still sitting silently. and Lucas watched James's figure until he disappeared around the corner. No one in the shop said another word, but everyone knew they had just witnessed something. Not an everyday thing, a meal, a lesson, and a truth. That not everyone who dresses simply is poor, and not everyone who is rich needs to be seen. It was dark when Lucas left the restaurant. He didn't go home right away. His feet kept walking, unconsciously walking along the paved sidewalk, where the streetlights cast a quiet, chilling light on the ground. The wind blew gently through the wrinkled collar of his shirt. In his head, James Miller's words rang out like a slow bell, slow, but clear, enough to knock on his shattered pride. Lucas never thought he would be standing there, in the same space as his chairman, in such a setting. Even more so, he never thought that the man he had insulted because of his appearance would be the highest-ranking person in the corporation. Everything he believed about how to look at people, about class classification, about what was called luxury, now felt hollow. He remembered Edward's eyes, not angry, not pleading. It was just the pain of a man who was once respected, now having to swallow his silence for fear of being hurt again. And Lucas was the one who fueled that wound, right in the middle of a restaurant. In front of many people. He stopped under a tree, looked up at the sky. The moon had not risen yet. There were only gray clouds drifting like unspoken words. He sighed. For the first time in many years, Lucas felt ashamed, not because he had been discovered, but because he realized he had gone too far from being kind. The next morning, he came to the company earlier than usual. No more fancy gray suit. He chose a light blue shirt, not fancy, no perfume. His face was still clean-shaven, but his eyes were somehow softer, quieter. As soon as he entered the lobby, Lucas heard someone whisper, "That's him, the one who caused trouble with the president yesterday." He didn't react, he just bowed to the receptionist. Entering the elevator, he looked in the mirror. For the first time, he didn't check his hair or collar. He looked into his own eyes. A man, once confident, once successful, but now relearning the lesson of how to be a human being. He went to the 12th floor, where the partnership office was located. The atmosphere that day was different. It was quieter than usual. Some colleagues looked at him with awkward eyes. Some turned away. Some opened their mouths to say something but stopped. Lucas didn't blame anyone. He understood. Sometimes people stay silent not because of contempt, but because they don't know where to start. He sat at the table, opened his laptop, but didn't turn it on. Hands on the keyboard. Silent, in his mind. There were only two images. One was James's calm but firm face. The other was Edward's eyes nodding slightly in forgiveness. He let out a long breath. Then he opened his desk drawer, took out a pen and paper. He began to write, not a report, not a request for forgiveness, but a letter to himself, to President James Miller, and to Mr. Edward, the man he had despised. Every stroke, Lucas wrote with remorse. No flowery, no long-winded, just honest words for the first time in years. He wrote, "I used to think that value was in a suit, a watch, or a seat in a restaurant. It turns out that value is in how people look at a person when they have nothing left. I was wrong. I apologize, and I will start over if I have the chance." He folded the letter and put it in an envelope. He did not sign it. Just wrote one line. "To the teacher I once forgot." The morning passed slowly in the 12th floor office. Lucas sat quietly at his desk, not turning on his computer, nor talking to anyone. The handwritten letter he had written last night was carefully placed in his shirt drawer, like a silent reminder. Around 9 o'clock in the morning, an internal notice appeared on the system. The title was brief, but it made Lucas's heart pound. Urgent Meeting, Partnerships Department. All personnel present in the conference room on the 15th floor within 10 minutes. Chairman James Miller presides. No one said anything. No one laughed. Only the sound of chairs being pulled gently. The footsteps blended together. Scattered, but heavy. Lucas followed the stream of people. His hand tightly clutched the letter in his pocket. Every step was a bell ringing in his heart, not because he was afraid of being fired, but because he didn't know if he deserved to be forgiven. The conference room on the 15th floor was spacious and bright. The light from the large glass windows shone directly onto the long, shiny wooden table in the middle. The staff sat down one by one, leaving the chair at the head of the table empty. A few minutes later, James Miller walked in, still wearing the same simple outfit as the day before. White shirt, khaki pants, light brown canvas shoes. No badge, no bodyguard, nothing but a calm look and a steady voice. He sat down, putting the documents in front of him. He looked around the room. I didn't call this meeting to scold you, but to remind you about something that seems small, but it determines how we live as people. The room was dead silent. Lucas sat in the middle of the row, not daring to raise his head. James continued, "Yesterday, I had dinner with an old friend, a former teacher, and also the one who was denied the right to sit quietly at dinner, just because of his unclean appearance." A few eyes turned to Lucas, but James did not name names. He spoke slowly. "I do not want to recount the details of that evening, because those who need to understand already understand. I just want to share one thing." He opened the small leather briefcase beside him. "Take out an old photo, put it on the table. This is me, 19 years old. When I was a construction worker in the suburbs of Salt Haven, when I had nothing but my 2 hands and a thin shirt, all eyes were on the photo. In the photo, a young man stood in the middle of a sunny construction site. Dusty clothes, tousled hair. The eyes looked up at the camera, but it was not a lowly look. It was the look of someone who knew he was going far." James folded the photo and put it away. Then he looked around. "Never think that someone who dresses worse than you is inferior to you, because you don't know who they used to be, and you don't know who they will become." No one said anything, only lowered eyes. James gently turned the pen in his hand, then continued, "Today, I received a letter. There was no name on the cover. It just said, 'To the teacher I once forgot.'" He opened the envelope and took out the letter Lucas had written. His voice was not reproachful, almost touching. The person who wrote this letter understood something very important, and I want to give that person a chance. James paused. His eyes were fixed on Lucas, not stern, not judgmental, but the eyes of a teacher asking his student, "Are you ready to change?" Lucas slowly stood up. His voice was hoarse. "That letter is mine. I don't expect immediate forgiveness, but I want to make amends with action, day by day." James nodded. "Good. Let's start by visiting Uncle Edward with me, tomorrow, 6 o'clock in the morning. On the way, I'll tell you about the time I was kicked out of the company I founded by the building security guard." Lucas's eyes widened. The room was stunned, but James just smiled. He stood up, folded the letter, and put it in his pocket. Life can be cruel to us, but we can choose how to move forward. And sometimes, bowing your head is the only way to hold it up properly. The meeting ended, but for Lucas, it was the beginning of a new life. It was still misty when Lucas pulled up in front of our Victory. The clock read exactly 6 o'clock in the morning. No one else was there. Only one man was leaning lightly against a lamppost on the side of the road, holding a steaming paper cup of coffee. James Miller. He was still wearing a simple windbreaker. The cuffs slightly rolled up, and a light blue shirt without a tie. Sneakers were faded, but clean and neat. Lucas walked over, bowed slightly. "Hello, sir." James turned, smiled, and handed Lucas a cup of hot coffee. "Good. Right on time. It's a little chilly today. Drink this to warm up." Lucas took it, his hands still shaking a little, not from the cold, but from his heart. A man who had insulted James. Now he was waiting for him and handing him coffee, as if nothing had happened. "My car is parked over there. Let's go," James said. They got into the car. The car was not as luxurious as everyone thought. It was just an old sedan. The light brown leather seats were worn at the edges. On the way, James did not play music. He did not use his phone. He just looked at the road and talked as if they were old colleagues. "Do you know, I was once refused entry to my own company," James said. Lucas was surprised. "Are you serious? Really? When we first started, I dressed too simply. A receptionist thought I was a trash collector around the building. He did not let me into the elevator." Lucas was silent. James smiled. "But you know what? I did not fire him. I taught him to be a receptionist by first listening." The car stopped in front of a small, old house with a faded, corrugated iron roof, quietly located in the middle of a suburban residential area. James stepped down first. Lucas followed. The wooden gate was pushed open gently, unlocked. A gray cat stepped out from the yard, rubbing its head against James's feet. Lucas looked at the scene, suddenly remembering the image that he had thought was not worthy of existing in his space. And now, he was standing in that person's space. The door opened. Edward appeared. Dark sweater, thin face, but his eyes lit up when he saw James. "You're here. So early. I promised. I brought someone with me today," James said, then turned. "This is Lucas." Edward looked at Lucas, the first second. That look made Lucas shiver, not because of anger, but because it was so calm. It was heartbreaking. Lucas bowed his head very low. "Sir, I came to apologize. But more than that, I want to do something to fix it." Edward quietly stepped aside, opening the door wider. "Come in. There's still hot tea in the house." They sat around an old wooden table. James poured tea, naturally as if they were used to it. Lucas sat across from Edward, his hands on his knees, his shoulders slightly hunched with tension. Edward poured Lucas a cup. "Drink. The tea isn't sweet, but it's easy to wake up." Lucas took a sip. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. James said, "I think Lucas can help you rearrange the old bookcase, then clean up the study room in the backyard. Who knows? Maybe one day, it will become a place where the neighborhood kids come to learn to read." Edward looked at James. After a while, he turned to Lucas. "Can you read?" Lucas nodded. "Yes, I can." Edward chuckled. "Good. Then let's start by reading the names of the books I've forgotten." Lucas stood up and walked over to the dusty bookshelf. He pulled out each book, gently brushed it clean, and placed it on the table. His hand touched the spine of each book as if he were repenting. "I used to think these things weren't important," he whispered. "But it turns out, the most important things aren't on the vest." James stood behind him, watching silently. No need to say anything more, because from then on, actions spoke louder than words. Early morning. Lucas stood in front of our Victory headquarters, holding a cup of hot coffee that James had just given him. James appeared on time, dressed simply as usual. "Let's go," James said. "Today is for you to listen." The car took them out of the city, through a few small streets, stopping in a quiet residential area. In front of them was Edward's old house. Lucas looked at the rustic wooden gate, his heart heavy. It was no longer fear, but the desire to start over. Edward opened the door. He still looked calm, but his eyes were somewhat more tolerant. "Come in, there's still hot tea in the house." The three of them sat around the wooden table. James didn't say much. He just told Lucas, "Start with small things. Clean up his bookshelf, for example." Lucas walked to the dusty bookcase. His hands shook slightly as he pulled out each one. "Sorry," he said softly. Not to anyone, but to himself. No more flowery words. No need for grand promises. Just a man wiping away his old self, bit by bit, with his own hands. Saturday afternoon. The sun was shining on the small streets, where there were no tall buildings or car horns. There were only trees swaying in the wind, and the faint smell of sugarcane juice wafting from a roadside stall. Lucas stood there, in front of a small restaurant by the park. The restaurant had no big sign, just a few plastic tables, low wooden chairs, and a faded canvas roof. He held a phone in his hand, his thumb shaking slightly as he pressed the call button. James's voice rang out after a few rings. "I'm listening." Lucas took a deep breath. "Are you free this afternoon? I want to treat you to a meal. Somewhere very simple." There was silence on the other end of the line for a few seconds. Then James replied, "Wherever, I'll come." Half an hour later, James appeared. Still simple as usual. He wore a thin beige sweater, dark khaki pants, and old white sneakers. Lucas stood up and bowed. "Thank you for coming." James smiled lightly. "I told you, when eating, don't call me sir, call me James. And you, the host of today's meal." Lucas smiled awkwardly. Then, "Please sit, James." They chose the innermost table, right under a banyan tree that was changing leaves. The owner, a small silver-haired old lady, brought out 2 plates of broken rice, a bowl of fish sauce, and 2 glasses of iced tea. Lucas said, "This is the place I used to eat when I was in school. At that time, I didn't have money to go to a big restaurant, but I always felt happy. The smell of grilled ribs here is exactly like the smell of rice my mother cooked in the past." James nodded. The smell of memories is always stronger than spices. They both ate. Not much was said. There was only the sound of the wind, the rustling of leaves, and the sound of rice being chewed gently and slowly. Lucas put down his chopsticks, looked straight at James. "I invited you to this meal, not to make up for your mistakes with money, but to remind myself that gratitude also needs to be shown through action." James did not say anything right away. He just took a sip of tea, then softly replied, "Words may be nice, but only actions have weight. You are on the right track. But this path must be walked for a long time." Lucas nodded. "I know. I don't want to do the right thing because I am reminded, but because I really feel ashamed of living wrongly for so long." James looked into the distance for a while, then said, "When I first started my business, there was a time when I didn't have enough money for lunch. I stood watching people eat in a small restaurant. A restaurant owner called me in and gave me a bowl of pho for free. I asked why. He said, Because you're hungry, and I'm full." James paused, his eyes softening. "Later, I bought back that whole street, but I still kept that faux restaurant. No price increase, no change of owner." Lucas was surprised. "You kept it, yes, because there are things that if lost, no amount of money can buy them back. Like a meal at the right time, like a chance to improve yourself." Lucas bowed his head. "Thank you for giving me both." The restaurant owner walked over and placed another small plate of dessert. "I'll give you some mung bean sweet soup. No charge." I felt lighter when I saw the two of you sitting and talking. James and Lucas both laughed. A smile has no upper or lower levels, no hierarchy or power, just two people who were once opposites, now sharing simplicity. Lucas raised his teacup. "For kindness, and for those who give us a second chance." James clinked his glasses lightly, and for those who dare to admit they were wrong the first time. The afternoon wind blew gently. On the table were 2 empty plates of rice. Only a thank you that didn't need to be said again. The week had begun in the Our Victory office, but there was something different about the atmosphere today. Not exactly lively, not exactly tense. Quiet, but beneath the silence, changes were quietly beginning. Lucas walked into the small conference room reserved for new hires. In his hands were a stack of documents, a slide deck, and a reprinted letter, the same apology letter he had written by hand the day before. He wasn't wearing a suit, just a plain white shirt, sleeves rolled up, no watch, no perfume. Below were nearly 24 young employees, people who had been with the company only a few weeks. They whispered to each other. Some recognized Lucas not because of his title, but because the story at the cafeteria had spread like a silent reminder throughout the office floors. Lucas stood in front of everyone. He took a deep breath. Then he began. "I'm Lucas, not to share an achievement, but to tell a lesson I learned late, but it's worth more than any certificate I've ever had." He turned on the screen. On it appeared a simple line. "When you think you're looking down on others, you're probably wrong about yourself." Lucas told, slowly, every detail of that fateful evening, from the contemptuous look to the sarcastic words he let out. Then, the moment he realized that the plainly dressed man was none other than President James Miller. But what changed me wasn't because he was the boss. It was because he didn't need to retaliate. He didn't use his power to intimidate. He used his calmness to teach me about humanity. Below, many employees fell silent. Some looked at each other. Some took notes, not to make a report, but to remember. Lucas continued, "I used to think to be respected, you have to dress nicely, speak big words. But it turns out, what makes people respect you the most is when they see you know how to bow your head at the right time. And today, I am not here as an employee, but as a person who has lived wrongly and is trying to live again by doing right." He stepped down, handing out a handwritten letter to each person. At the end of the letter was a sentence handwritten in blue ink. "If you forget that you were good, remind yourself with your actions." That afternoon, Lucas did not go straight home. He turned into a homeless support center near the south of the city. The center manager, a woman in her 50s, short hair, gentle smile, was surprised to see him. "Hello, how can I help you?" Lucas smiled softly. "No, I need help. I need a place to work without getting paid. I want to start with the smallest things. Maybe washing dishes, mopping floors, or just sitting and listening to people tell stories." The woman looked at him for a moment, then smiled. "We always need people like that. Come in." Lucas walked in. For the first time in his life, he wore an apron, held a mop, and didn't feel ashamed. On the contrary, he felt he was cleaning himself up, step by step, day by day. Another afternoon. Lucas walked into a small bookstore. In his hand was a cloth bag containing old books that Edward had given him. He went to the children's section and put down 3 books. On the cover was a label, for children who can't afford to buy books. The owner asked, "Are you a teacher?" Lucas shook his head. "I'm just a man who used to think books weren't important, and is correcting that mistake." James knew all that, even though he didn't say it, because he had a habit of watching from afar, not to control, but to make sure the change was real. One afternoon, James received a short email from Lucas. "Dear James, I'm no longer afraid of other people's eyes. Now I'm only afraid of one thing, forgetting my own lessons. Thank you for not chasing me away, but for taking me away." James finished reading, closed his laptop, looked up at the afternoon sky outside the window. The wind blew in, cool. He smiled, then whispered a sentence. A man who knows he's wrong has already started to be right. Late afternoon. The sun was about to set behind the roofs at the end of the street. The light was spreading on the stone sidewalks, where the footsteps of passers-by were starting to thin out. James Miller walked slowly through the old street. No driver, no bodyguard. Just him, still the same old shoes, still the same calm demeanor, and still the same eyes that often stopped at small things. He stopped at a roadside tea shop. The old owner sat inside, still wrapping sticky rice, seeing him. She smiled toothlessly. "It's been a long time since you've come here, huh?" "Same tea." James nodded. "Yes, same." She poured him a glass of iced tea, then pointed into the distance. "Look, there's that guy who always wore a smart suit. He used to be so annoying. Now he comes here every day to give out free meals to homeless people." James looked on. On the other side of the park, a young man was handing out lunch boxes to the poor. He was wearing a simple t-shirt and a cloth apron. The shiny watch was gone. The cold face was gone. It was Lucas. He smiled slightly, bowing his head in thanks when the recipient said thank you. "Son, how strange. People are still so kind today." Lucas only responded with the familiar sentence, "Because I'm full today, and you're hungry." James smiled slightly. He raised his cup of tea, took a sip, a slight bitterness on the tip of his tongue, but then a sweet aftertaste lingered. He didn't approach Lucas, didn't call, didn't wave, just stood still from afar, enough to see, enough to know. True kindness doesn't need to be recognized. The wind blew through the trees. The yellow leaf gently fell, spun, and landed at James's feet. He bent down and picked up the leaf, lightly, like picking up something that had been forgotten. He thought to himself, people will change. If there is someone patient enough not to abandon them at the first mistake, and change doesn't need to be noisy, just real enough. A child ran past, holding a half-eaten piece of bread. He stumbled, almost fell, but a hand held him from behind. Lucas. He supported the child, dusted off his clothes. No one said anything. Just a look, a nod. Then he continued to return to his unfinished charity lunchbox. James stood up and left the cafe. He continued walking. No one recognized him as the chairman of a trillion-dollar corporation. And he didn't need that, because he knows, every afternoon, when he walks past someone who used to despise others, but now bends down to help others, he does the right thing. And to James Miller, a simple man when walking down the street, but the greatest when seeing good things coming back. That is the real power, another way, another person, and a world being repaired by small actions, starting with a meal, an apology, and a person who did not speak, but forgave.